One way to reflect on our faith and how much we live it out involves asking ourselves, if it were illegal to be a Christian, would there be enough evidence to convict me? Perhaps another way of saying that is, how am I different because of my belief in God, because of my desire to follow Jesus? How does my faith in the Son of God move me to do certain things or not do certain things, to say or not say certain things? What are the life consequences of my faith? Now, my intention here is not to ask how people of faith in general are different from people of no faith in general. Rather, I ask how our faith makes each of us different than who we would be otherwise. In answering that question, you might think of the time we spend in church. We might think of certain actions we either do because they are moral or avoid because they are immoral. We might even think of our friendships or family relationships and how they are influenced by our faith. Ultimately, two words ought to enter our analysis, our thinking about what our faith does for us. Those two words, sacrifice and trust. Sacrifice and trust. These two words are really the best way to describe the actions of the two widows in our readings today. In our first reading, the widow of Zarephath is willing to trust that if she gives a little bit of food to Elijah, the last of what she has, that she and her son will still have enough to live on, even though her life is far from comfortable and her long-term security is non-existent. She's being asked to give up her last real hope for food. She tells Elijah she's down to her last meal, but Elijah still asks her for some bread and water, for he knows that she will not lack what she truly needs, even in the midst of a terrible drought. The widow trusted so much that she was able to sacrifice that little bit she had in order to help Elijah. Similarly, Jesus praises the widow in our gospel reading for giving more than all the others. Now, she did not give more in the way that the world measures quantities. She gave more in the sense that her total offering reflected a total trust in God. By giving her last coin, she sacrificed everything and thus placed her trust in God. What about us? Where do we place our trust in God? Where do we sacrifice something in our lives so that our love for God may grow stronger? We must certainly sacrifice our selfish desires, our pride, our desire to be thought well of, or sometimes, yes, our comfort, if we are to grow closer to God rather than simply closer to this world. Giving up any of these things is a true sacrifice, and doing so requires that trust in God, similar to those widows trusting in Him. Even if at a lesser degree of trust, right? We're not being asked for that total amount. But even as we think of all those different ways that we trust in God and are willing to sacrifice for that relationship with Him, I must also mention the most obvious sacrifice that these widows make, and that is the sacrifice of worldly goods. Last week we were reminded of the greatest commandment, to love God with our entire body, mind, soul, and strength. And if we are to love God with all our strength, we must also include, yes, even some of our financial strength as part of that love. The Old Testament uses the idea of a literal tithe, 10% of what we receive being offered back to God. The New Testament in many ways goes a step further with this story about the widow giving her last coin, as well as Acts of the Apostles when the community of believers shared everything in common. Now, if we can't reach that true tithe right away, if we can't get to what's sometimes recommended is that 5% to our parish, 1% to the diocesan appeal, and 4% to other charities, can we at least offer back to God the proceeds of 1 hour of our work? After all, God offers himself to us during what should be the greatest hour of our week, the Holy Mass. God gives himself to us, not because he has to, but because he desires to do so freely. Can we likewise freely offer him some of the fruit of our work? 2 widows stand out today as examples of trust in the Lord and of willingness to sacrifice for him. We focus on our belief in God, on our relationship with him. And ultimately, such a focus leads us to ask how much we trust that all of our needs will be met, even if we sacrifice some of our wants and desires. If we then trust God so much, can we also trust, like those widows, that if we offer God a true sacrifice, and not merely what is left over, that even in a drought, the jar of flour shall not go empty, nor the jug of oil run dry, until the day when the Lord sends rain upon the earth. To the extent that we trust in God and are willing to sacrifice for our relationship with him, our faith will have an effect on who we are and will make a difference in how we live.